when it comes to Bitcoin, I understand that there are a host of cypherpunks and OGs who were early to Bitcoin who were literally 10, close to 15 years in front of where the smart money is, who feel like they've been dislodged from the market. But I will comment and say that one of the comments that I really sort of took to heart was from American Hodl when he said Bitcoin's not for everyone, it's for anyone. And to that point, we've got to remember that, to your point that you raised, that it is money for my enemies. And not that I'm sort of creating that division or want to stoke any sort of further division in that capacity. I just want to say that, hey, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is for anyone who wants to adopt it. And this is where the real value in Bitcoin is actually going to grow by more people adopting it, not less. And, if we juxtapose that entire scenario of Bitcoin's going to gain strength because more and more people are going to adopt it and recognize what value it brings to them in their personal life, to what's happening with, say, the US dollar, where in the last 2 years, coming up to 3 now, whatever it is, the US did something unthinkable in that they excluded Russia, one of the G7 nations, from the SWIFT network. You remove people from the network, it inherently makes that network weaker. It doesn't make it stronger. And now you've got the thought of BRICS coming up, and you've got Russia, China, Brazil, India basically creating their own, global reserve or potential competition of the global reserve currency. Now, I don't think it'll ever be a competition of the US dollar, but you've at least created an incentive for them to create an alternative reserve currency. And I just look at this and think that's complete madness on the US's part, because the US should be the global reserve currency for everyone. And when you leverage that with Bitcoin, all of a sudden we have effectively a global reserve currency that can be backed by collateral that is what I believe perfect collateral. And this is where, to me, a lot of people don't really understand the role that collateral plays in our financial system. And as I was looking over a couple of things, a couple of chats that I've had with a few people over the years, and we're sort of entering this phase now where the debt problem that we've got is becoming acute. And everyone talks about the debt problem, but it's not a debt problem. What it is a collateral problem. And just to explain that for a second, when you have a debt problem, it's backed by collateral. And so when someone doesn't pay a debt, you simply take what was the security that they secured that debt with to make good or make whole on that. The problem we've got is that the debts that have been issued, the borrower doesn't have a problem because he just is going to do a workaround as to how he pays that out. The problem is the person who's holding the security and realizing that they don't have any security there. There is no there when it comes to the collateral they're holding. The collateral they're holding is actually worthless. And therein lies the problem with the banking system that we've got. So in order to solve the debt problem, we really need to solve the collateral problem. And the collateral problem can be solved by one of two ways. You can either inflate everything to infinitum so that now all of a sudden you've basically adjusted the debt to equity ratios and everyone can move on with their lives. But how you practically do that is you pump money into certain asset classes. And if I look at really broadly, what are the asset classes that you've got to pump the money into? You can pump the money into the bond market, but that's not going to help because that's debt, adding more debt. You can pump that more money in collateral, or you can pump more money into the stock market, which is going to basically get you probably a 10 or 20% return on your money if you put a couple of $1 trillion into that. So you're going to create maybe $50 trillion of equity. And you can put that into property, which if you put a couple of $1 trillion into property, it's only going to move the needle a little bit. And everyone's already having servicing problems with their debt. So it's hard to create collateral by pumping it into the existing asset classes that we've got. The alternative, and this is what I think is the path of least resistance, it's going to cause the least amount of pain, is if you pump trillions of dollars into buying Bitcoin, you're going to pump the price not by 10, 20, 30%. You're going to pump the price by 5,000, 10,000, 20,000%. And all of a sudden, $1 trillion into Bitcoin will probably push the market cap up $50 trillion. And all of a sudden, now we have collateral. And this is the fundamental problem that we've got with our banking system at the moment, is that we're effectively operating on effectively an under-collateralized banking system, in that you put up $1 and they lend out $20 on the back of it. So it's like an upside down triangle when you look at how to balance something. Our system only requires a little bit of equity to create a whole host of debt. Now, it's akin to looking at or trying to balance an upside down pyramid. That to me looks like a really unstable structure. And we're seeing, you've seen the meme, basically that one little thing on a stack of all sorts of machines sticking together, and it's got this one little toothpick basically holding it all together. And if you flick that out, the whole thing falls over. That's what our under-collateralized financial system looks like now, except everyone's in the bag for it. The property market's in the bag for it. The government's in the bag for it. The stock market's in the bag for it because it all rests on leverage. That's what an under-collateralized system looks like. I guess you compare that to what a Bitcoin standard looks like. You basically have a pyramid that looks like that, where if you want to borrow in a Bitcoin standard, you have to over-collateralize your lending. So if you want to borrow $50, you've got to put up as a minimum $100. They'll only lend you 50% of what you've got. And if you compare that to our market, like the traditional finance that we look at, if you want to borrow $1 million on a home in Australia and probably the US too, you only need to put down $50,000. So you put down 5%, they'll lend you 95%. That seems insane. And so what my point with this is that Bitcoin has the ability to grow in size to an asset that is probably 10, 20, 30 times bigger than the entire asset class at the moment that we hold. Because in order to work on a Bitcoin standard, you need to over-collateralize your lending, not under-collateralize it. So my thought process and thinking is Bitcoin can grow 50, 100, 1,000x from here, and it still won't really touch the sides from a collateral perspective as to what it needs to support. And this is where, if you peel layers back on this with the lending, homes are a horrible, horrible form of collateral. And this is what underpins most of our lending in society, and governments and homes underpins most of our collateral. If we were to create a Bitcoin as the perfect collateral, which I think it is, and underpin our financial system with Bitcoin, firstly, what needs to happen is Bitcoin needs to increase dramatically in value. But by underpinning our financial system with Bitcoin as opposed to homes, is that allows the financial system to operate and use Bitcoin as a collateral rather than our homes. And what that means is when the system becomes basically over risky and looking like it needs to basically capitulate like it did during the GFC. During the GFC, all of the collateral was in the homes. So what ended up happening? Basically, millions of people were dispersed and lost their homes because they couldn't afford to meet the repayments. The collateral that they created, the system became worthless. Property prices fell 30, 40, 50% in some places, maybe more. And that was because the collateral wasn't really good collateral, because no one really wanted a third home in the middle of the desert or wherever it might be. However, there's 8 billion people on Earth who are going to need Bitcoin, but maybe only 1 million or 2 million people actually know they need it right now. And so this is where you can de-risk the whole financial sector by using Bitcoin as a collateral versus homes, governments, and the like. And most importantly, by using Bitcoin as collateral, two things happen. The Bitcoiners are psychopaths who are never going to want to sell their Bitcoin. So they're not going to cause huge inflation. But if you financialize the homes and the stock market, that's a very fiat system that basically propels itself into consumerism and short-termism and spending and buying and inflation and running that cycle of inflation. Whereas by monetizing Bitcoin, and we've both got experience dealing with Bitcoiners, we know Bitcoiners who are worth probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, driving around in 10, 15-year-old cars because they don't want to spend their Bitcoin. Now, that seems mad, but that's just the attraction to Bitcoin. It causes a completely different way of thinking. And to me, this is the important thing that we've got to look forward to. Once the rest of the world figures this out, governments start to figure out, BlackRocks of the world start to figure it out, then the financial system is going to be built on Bitcoin, and that's going to be the pristine form of collateral. That's going to be the collateral that is rewarded with the lowest interest rate possible and the best the best terms.
I would love for you to kind of touch on this notion that the Bitcoin is a triple point asset and get into a little bit of this, because I haven't heard this. So I was tipped off by Luke Mikic, and he said, you got to ask him about this. I haven't had it. So I'd love for you to kind of just go into this a bit and about where we're headed. And again, if you do agree with Jack, in the monetary premium being, around 450-ish, we'll say trillion.
If you want the answer to that question right there and you like that spicy clip, check it out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. But if you want the full interview in its entirety, all the spicy clips put together, and you're not going to want to miss it, believe me, then check that out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. Do it.